This is the Big Brown Gadfly. Just so you know, I'm working on a Spanish version, El Tabarón de Atenas. So that will be on there soon. I actually like the way the Gadfly sounds in Spanish a little bit better. But I'm here with Ray Fava right now, and we're gonna be talking about the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest evangelical, largest Protestant denomination in the United States, which right now is facing multiple crises. Ray Fava is the publisher of the Evangelical Dark Web, and he runs his own show on there. He's also a young dad. He's exactly the kind of face of what we need in the church. People coming from the outside with a lot of that youthful spirit. I'm not going to reveal his age, but he's not over 40, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so he's still on the young side. All right, so let's just get right to it. Right now, the Southern Baptist Convention, there was a lot of news that hit. And let me just start for those of you who don't follow all the inside baseball. There is an election that's coming up in June at the yearly convention in Anaheim. And this is really where you have to start to understand what's going on in the SBC right now. The reason why there is an election is because Ed Litton, the current president, had to step down because of a plagiarism scandal. So now the presidency is open for the last year. And the two main choices that people have to choose between the presidency of the SBC were, at the beginning, it was Tom Ascol versus Willie Rice. Now, Willie Rice had to step down because there were all of these questions about whether he abetted grooming at a church where he was pastoring. He was in conversation with someone named Tom Buck, who is friends with Tom Ascol. They run this thing called Founders Ministries together. And Tom Ascol was running against Willie Rice for the presidency. And Tom Buck had, I guess, information about Willie Rice's mismanagement of the grooming case at the church. And he was threatened that something bad was going to happen to him if he came out with the information. And then lo and behold, miraculously, Willie Rice steps down. Bart Barber, who we're going to talk about today, who's a national figure, takes Willie Rice's place. So now Bart Barber is running against Tom Ascol. And suddenly, Tom Buck is the subject of a hit piece in Baptist Global News, where something that Tom Buck's wife had written about their earlier years in their marriage, where there was fighting and tension, that was published. It was accessed, and it was referenced in a very unflattering way out of context to make it look like Tom Buck was an abuser, which leads many people to say that Tom Buck was basically the object of retaliation for the fact that he had exposed what was going on with Willie Rice. And then it all got much richer today because Tom
Looks like he's cutting out there.
then
I don't want to interrupt, but I don't want to cut you off, but I think you're cutting out.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm sorry I cut out. If I cut out, you know how sometimes the internet cuts out. If I cut out, just take the ball and run with it. It means your connection is still running. All right. So we have like multiple scandals, which is all just revealing just how messed up the SBC is. Okay. So let's first start with our understanding of Karen Swallow Prior. And do you think that this is a serious scandal, that she is a professor at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and she has made herself a voice for women and a voice for abuse survivors? And apparently she took an essay that was given to her in confidence, and she dealt with it so irresponsibly. Either she leaked it herself or she allowed someone to steal it. And basically that then became the subject of a public scandal. How do you read this? Is this a serious scandal, or is this something that just Karen Swallow Prior's enemies are making too big of a deal of? What do you think?
I do think it's pretty unethical to leak something that was given to you in confidence. That's just to say the least. Obviously, the timing of this gives credence to the theory that this was clear retaliation. I think that, the timing is uh, very telling, especially because it's related indirectly to Willie Rice's Deacon Gate scandal.
Right. And so I think that the reason why is in my mind, it is a definite scandal and worth talking about and covering is because Karen Swallow Prior was at the forefront of making abuse and women's issues a huge issue in the SBC. She wrote the petition that got Paige Patterson removed because he supposedly handled this sex abuse scandal. And so for someone who makes it seem as though she is outside of abuse survivors, for her to be leaking a woman's private details that she released out into the public as a way to retaliate against her husband for having brought attention to Willie Rice and his mishandling of abuse cases at his church, that just makes it look as though Karen Swallow Prior is really mostly interested in advancing her political camp, maybe advancing herself, but definitely all of her citation of sex abuse cases seems to be directed at her enemies. It seems to be it's a weapon to use against her enemies. And I think that is probably one of the things that is the most scandalous there. But I mean, in my mind, if people haven't figured out that the sex abuse scandal was being weaponized and it was hypocritical, if they couldn't figure it out by now, do you think that really anyone is going to figure it out? Or, I mean,
well, it's interesting when you look at the Southern Baptist Convention and their massive emphasis on sex abuse. The only thing that they've tangibly come out with their task force was a woman who is 26 years old and had a 12-year-long sexual relationship with a then professor, but they both went on to be SBC staffers. So this is what that task force has produced in terms of results and investigation. And I believe, their deadline is coming up in June to produce some results and findings. So thus far, we're 9 months in, give or take, 10 months in. And, it turns out that maybe, the polity of the SBC doesn't really allow for a lot of national sex abuse cover-ups that, Mike Stone was accused of, or the people that Karen Swallow Prior would accuse of covering up sex abuse. So because, Baptist polity, it would keep it local naturally.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, I want to give a shout out to John Lee. Thank you very much. He noted that he saw the Enemies Within the Church documentary. Thank you so much, John. We're glad to have you on the podcast. There are so many dimensions to the hypocrisy of the sex abuse scandal. And, Ray, I do have to thank you because when I got fired from the SBC, I think you were one of the few people who covered what had happened. And I remember the article that you wrote at that time. You were writing for, I think you were writing for the Knock Report when you covered it.
Might have been, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that they said, one of the things that you pointed out was the fact that I had submitted the resolutions about sex abuse, and those were the things that had gotten me in trouble. And I had written about sex abuse as well as being a same-sex sex abuse survivor. And when I got fired, I mean, please, I had email communications with Karen Swallow Prior. She absolutely refused to help. I asked her if she could step in and sort of try to plead for me with the people who were friends with her, because she went with all the people who were driving me out. Bart Barber was a trustee of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He was very powerful. He was very much, he would have been in a position to intervene to kind of try to protect me. He absolutely was part of the movement to get me out. And in fact, when my good friend Joe Goodson was posting things in the Baptist Review, which is a Facebook page, about the hypocrisies in firing someone for writing about sex abuse at the same time that supposedly you're advocating for sex abuse survivors, he was kicked out of the Baptist Review, and he got a private message from Bart Barber in which Bart Barber claimed that it was all my fault, that I was a problem and that everyone had been complaining about me, all of which is somewhat dishonest from what I can tell, because none of these complaints were brought to me when I was working there. So I saw it as a sex abuse survivor and as someone who was working hard to try to work on issues regarding sex abuse. For instance, I submitted the resolution trying to strip away the NDAs because that's a huge problem. I saw firsthand that these people absolutely were never had sex abuse survivors in mind. Karen Swallow Pryor, Rachel Den Hollander, even some of the sex abuse survivors who made a name from being a survivor, like Hannah Kate Williams, none of people had any interest in protecting sex abuse survivors. So it does not surprise me at all that now we are seeing all of this blow up, where Karen Swallow Pryor takes an essay that a woman wrote, and even if you were to take the position that she was an abuse survivor, you would never publish someone against their will. You would never publish their private writings about the sex abuse. I mean, that is something that's such a betrayal of trust. You're repeating the cycle of abuse. You know what I mean? And the fact that they involve themselves in that, it just points to the fact of how cheap this movement is, how bad it is, and how much they have used innocent people's suffering as a weapon, because they used the abuse issue to get rid of Paige Patterson. And then once they got rid of Paige Patterson, they got rid of all the people who Paige Patterson hired, including many racial minorities, many people who were very much working for women's interests and for sex abuse survivors. But the fact of the matter was that they didn't stand with any of those people who lost their jobs in the anti-Patterson backlash, because really it was never about helping any of those people. You know? I mean, is it even possible that some of these people are really, truly, authentically saved Christians if they act this way? I mean,
I think Karen Swallow Pryor is pretty obviously a wolf. Wolf in wolf's clothing. Yeah, absolutely. And if you just to go back on, you look at her stance on abortion, it's just like completely feminist.
Yeah.
It's not even a biblical standpoint. It's a very feminist standpoint.
Yeah. Well, and
she's coming up in a Gospel Coalition debate series, which is why I bring that example.
Well, and the fact that she constantly packages herself as, I'm really conservative, or I'm really pro-life. I don't know. Why don't they just embrace what they are, which embrace their positions? His servant says, I do not see how people can't see through their hypocrisy. Thank you very much, his servant. So Ray, what say you to that? Why is it that people there are still some people who can't see through the hypocrisy? Those who are seeing it, why did it take them so long?
I mean, there is a lot of hypocrisy to see through. So you might be so on the rabbit trail of hypocrisy that you don't it's kind of like when you say you're conservative, but you're only trying to conserve like 10 years ago progressivism. Right. So if you're on that type of train with hypocrisy and fighting the hypocrisy, and you don't necessarily realize that the hypocrisy runs a lot deeper or has much larger history. You look at people like Al Mohler, who's very institutionalized, and people don't really realize that he pretty much changed coats during the first conservative resurgence to the winning side. So, and people don't realize that he's part of the hypocrisy. And that's kind of been like he's been a very tense issue in the Southern Baptist Convention as it relates to trying to root out the corruption, because people don't want to touch him. Even people like Tom Askell haven't really taken that many shots at Al Mohler.
Right. Well, and that's what is so hard to look at this. First of all, Sean Warwick, thank you very much. He says the woke downgrade continues. Thank you very much for contributing that. We're going to talk about how this relates to wokeness. Sean Warwick also says this is clouds without water. Interesting. I want to hear more about that. Humanists. I like that comment. I think that with you bring up Al Mohler, and I kind of want to stay on that point for just a second. What's really tragic about the Tom Askell situation, because it really involves both of the Toms. Okay, Tom Askell is the one that's running for the SBC president, and his friend who runs the Founders Ministries with him, and it's really because Tom Buck was involved in the debates about who should be the next president that he became the subject of this retaliation. But what's really sad is that Tom Askell and Tom Buck were both people in the past who really kind of preached kind of what you're talking about, this cautiousness. Let's not condemn people too quickly. They both said that, well, we've talked to Karen Swallow prior. There are good people on that side of the debate. We don't want to dismiss them or brush them aside. And so for people who showed that kind of caution, that kind of reservation, that kind of circumspection to be treated this brutally, this viciously, I almost wonder why people don't look at that and immediately say, okay, this proves that going slow, going nice, being winsome is not the way to go.
They're going to call you the same names anyway.
Yeah, they
the way I
don't
look at it.
they don't care if you're nice to them. You're just literally, in this case, we see it. You're just giving them intimate information about yourself that will be used against. I mean, they did use information that they got because they were trusted by Tom Buck, his wife, and they used that. That's really unfortunate. I want to talk a little bit about David Baumgartner. He, young man who wrote the article in Baptist News Global. Have you heard a lot about this person, Ray?
I've heard that he's gay.
Well, I don't want to get into
that much I've heard, but
was
no, it's like Protestia has substantiated these claims with like witnesses and stuff.
Really? Okay. Well,
that much I've heard. And
okay.
he was the guy who complained about the air conditioning at the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah, he's very famous. Yeah, he's famous for complaining about the air conditioning.
So he wasted a lot of people's time because it's a business meeting and there's like a half-hour time limit to get all these motions or whatever in, and he's just wasting time,
right?
Trying to make a joke.
And it could have been he did that intentionally because he wanted to delay or derail some other thing that he was told to stop. He's young. He is a former student of mine. I taught him when I was at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He was a Latin student of mine. So the one thing the one thing I can say about my interaction with him is, and this is very rare in terms of students, okay? Usually, no matter what my students' political views are, that never spills over into my relationship with the student, but I really felt like he was very manipulative. He reached out to me, he was my student as I was being driven out, and I never brought that up in the classroom because that's not something that I would bring up while I'm teaching. But he was aware of it because it was all over social media, and from what I understand from other students, he was very much endorsing the administration's campaign. Okay, so he was bad mouthing me, or he was at least siding against me among the students. And then he would send me text messages that were trying to sort of establish some kind of friendly relationship with me. I felt like it was manipulative, like he was trying to get information from me. And I see that now he just has such a lack of judgment and a lack of discernment. I mean, why would you publish that article, especially at this stage where he's got to be like 23 or 24 years old? And I feel bad for him because I can see that he probably was put up to it by powerful people behind the scenes who wouldn't want that to be on their hands. But for you to expose someone's private writing like that in a way to make them look terrible, and
I believe he also virtue signaled about the weight of publishing that too. Like
what did he say
on social? It was a tweet that he had on Twitter. Like he's like talking about how this is a weighty thing to publish, but it had to be done, type of mentality.
Yeah, I mean, like, why would you claim that had to be done? That we could have not known about that. I mean, this was a thing between a man and his wife. It looks like they already resolved it. The whole essence of the essay that Jennifer Buck wrote was basically that they overcame the problems. And so if you're going to say that you don't want to give people the message that you can pray your way out of domestic abuse, then just don't bring it up. Don't bring up the story. Like, why bring up the story if that's not what you wanted to get out there? Okay. Sean Warwick says that this is the problem of the SBC 11th commandment. And Ray, can you summarize what the 11th commandment is?
Thou shalt not speak ill of another Southern Baptist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's the short of it.
Right. Like basically there's this rule that you're supposed to respect other Southern Baptists and not drag your dirty laundry out into the public, although they violate that when they want to go after Paige Patterson. They violate that when they want to put out nasty press releases about me, which Southwestern did. They're very happy to violate that, but then
It
when
only
they
goes one way.
it only goes one way. It only protects the people in power. All right. So John Lee mentions this. Let's talk a little bit about the wokeness and how this relates to the woke movement. John Lee says, I'm showing the DVD. I think this one he's referring to Enemies Within the Church, to our small sized church for the last several weeks, drafted up some notes and links on woke CRT, and it's mind blowing, the apostasy. All right. So, Ray, you have your finger on the pulse here. Does this Karen Gate, we're going to call it Karen Gate because Karen Swallow Prior is very appropriately named Karen, and she's behaving like a Karen, right?
Right.
And she's in the middle of all this. Does this have anything to do with wokeness?
Yes, in terms of the feminist side of wokeness, I would say so. You know, just in terms of the way that feminism redefines a lot of things, like I feel like sexual abuse is losing its meaning because of the feminist redefinition of it. So
Right.
in terms of that much, and certainly the
Mhm.
Me Too, Church Too movement, there is an element of wokeness definitely
Yeah.
at play here.
Mhm.
I'm interested to see your thoughts since you're trying to make the connection a little deeper than
Oh,
what
with
I just said.
wokeness?
Yeah.
Well, I think that this exposes exactly what woke is. It is nothing but a weaponization of movements that have a kernel of truth to it. I care tremendously about sex abuse. I've spent much of my life fighting for it, but I've become really cynical about the whole thing because of the fact that the whole sex abuse issue, it only protects people who have been victimized by famous, and it doesn't actually protect anyone. All it does is it's used as a way to demolish famous people who are targets anyway. It doesn't protect a survivor, it doesn't prevent any from getting abused. And I think the biggest blow to the woke movement and their obsession with abuse is the fact that it was the Republicans in Florida who passed the anti-grooming bill about bringing this stuff to kindergartners through third grade students. That's absolutely the kind of action you need to take to address sex abuse and child abuse. You have to get at the root of it, the grooming, so you can
Yeah.
prevent it from the beginning. And I was working on that. I mean, we were working on that back in 2017. And Karen Swallow Prior, my interactions with her, she absolutely refused to help. She didn't want to go near any of that stuff about intervening in schools because it wasn't the right lucrative way to talk about sex abuse, if that makes sense.
I mean, yeah, just along those lines, you know, I'm pretty active politically locally.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I'm running for county commissioner, just one of 5.
Yeah.
And one of the issues that I'm going to be running on is the issue of grooming and sexual, you know, just
Right.
I want to do what I can locally to
Mm-hmm.
combat this because Maryland law is very pro groomer. It just
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very pro groomer.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we currently had to deal with, you know, the fact that PFLAG wanted to put gay flags in all these classrooms. You know, they're
Mm-hmm.
giving them to the schools and pushing them on the teachers to display them in the classrooms. We had to fight that. And it had to do
Yeah.
with that and just a normalization of sexual immorality, which leads to a whole lot of abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Because I don't know if you're familiar with like people like Elijah Schaefer who talk about how,
yes.
you know, back when he was a child, like they were trying to groom him into a lot more, but you know, certain, you know, they weren't really down with it. But now kids nowadays are kind of being taught to be more down with some of the things that, you know,
Yeah.
child sex cults and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that it's such an important part of understanding the danger of wokeness and how satanic, because on the one hand, they're trying to scream and scream and scream about sex abuse at the same time that they're doing nothing about the grooming. And that's where the real problem is. And I think the worst thing of all is to make it seem as though the solution to the abuse issue is to dismantle patriarchy, because the grooming that we see in schools was an outgrowth of the movement to dismantle patriarchy, because they said you had to talk to little kids in order to get them to think about sex differently, and that really becomes grooming. So it's kind of crazy.
And ironically, public schools are not a patriarchal environment whatsoever.
No, they're
And
totally
that you are
dominated.
like significantly more likely to be sexually abused in a public school than you are a Catholic church.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah.
getting rid of the patriarchy is not the solution here. And
Yeah.
there's no data to suggest that it is.
Yeah. Okay. Pedro Garcia says, didn't the conservative section of the SBC get abortion abolitionism on the official denomination platform? And I would
He's
like,
talking about the resolution from the convention that the messengers overrode the
yeah.
resolutions committee to bring forth to the floor.
Yes. Yes. This was a moment.
It wasn't, yeah.
It was a moment like the sunlight peeked through the clouds in answer to Pedro's message. And the messengers did have enough wherewithal, enough organization to force that onto a resolution committee that did not want to put that in. But yes, it is true. There is a
It wasn't
conservative
that
section.
strong, though. It's not as strong as he's wording it, though.
Yeah, well, it was, at least it didn't try to do things. It didn't say that there were equal opinions on both sides. I would like to remind Pedro that pro-life resolutions usually get passed at the SBC. It's kind of one of those things that they have to do. The issues about women's roles and the issues about grooming in schools or LGBT, those things usually get blocked at the resolution phase. And I could say that from having been through it. But yes,
Yeah,
true that.
Resolution 4 talked
Mhm.
about dudes and women's sports, but it
Yeah,
was pretty weak and had to be amended to be stronger because,
right.
James Mayer is not going to come out with a strong resolution on that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then here we have his servant saying, and they are openly angry about the bill passing. I think he might be referring to the anti-grooming bill. That
And he's referring to Southern Baptist or feminist.
I'm not sure. Maybe his servant, if you're watching there, if you can let us know who's
Who
the they.
identifies as they? Whose pronouns are they?
Yeah, yeah. Whose pronouns are they? All right. Well, I mean, there's a lot. I can go on and on and on because I know all these people. I've had personal dealings with all of these people. So I mean, I could just sit there and tell stories for hours and hours and hours. But I want to try to focus this a little bit because Ray is such a great person to have online. So I'm just going to throw this out to you. I kind of had the title, "If you love Satan, you'll love the new SBC," because I think that the prospect of Bart Barber being the next president of the SBC, which I think is probably going to happen, is basically just that it's game over. The devil will have control of that denomination. I'll explain why I say that. But for right now, I want you to address this one comment that was put in there by Thomas, Bill Askell. All right. So tell us, is that going to be the way to save the SBC, is to elect Bill Askell? What do you think?
I think he was referring to Bill Askell bringing forth he led the charge to bring forth the abortion
Oh,
abolition
okay. It wasn't Tom
resolution.
Askell.
It was Bill Askell that did that.
Okay, it wasn't. Okay, so all right, so I gotcha. So if you could just talk a little bit about, do you think that Tom Askell is the way to go? Is that going to be the way to save
Oh,
the SBC?
brother-in-law. My bad.
Brother-in-law? Yes. Okay.
According to the comments.
Yeah.
Can Tom Askell save the SBC? It's more possible than Mike Stone, I think.
Yeah.
I think that much is true, but to be honest, he's very political. He might
Tom
almost
Askell.
be, Tom Askell might almost be too political to be
Hmm.
effective. Because,
Hmm.
just to use like a Game of Thrones analogy, you need someone that in Game of Thrones lore, there's this one Stark that was handed the king before Ned Stark. He went up in there, he served for 11 hours and just administered justice, executing the people who murdered the
Hmm.
previous king and then resigned. You need someone like that going into the Southern Baptist Convention, not someone that's so focused on politics going into
Right.
that
Hmm.
role. So you need someone that's here to collect bodies.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's Tom Askell. Tom Buck would have been closer to that, but I think he's not being vindicated by this. At least his judgment looks very poor because of the recent things being brought to light. His
Hmm.
trust of Karen, his family's trust of Karen Swallow Prior, but
Yeah.
he's had public trust of Karen Swallow Prior in the past, and
Hmm.
then his trust of Rachel Denhollander as
Right.
in the very recent times. So Tom Buck, I don't think, has great judgment, and he would have been a better choice, in my opinion, than Tom Askell.
Hmm.
So if
Yeah.
Tom Buck's judgment is in question, what does that say about Tom Askell's judgment?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know that my experience with both of them has been that a lot of times they say things that are really supportive of people who want to defend the church against the woke threat. But then if the discussion veers into naming names and making people, holding people to account who behind the scenes have undermined the gospel, very often Tom Askell and Tom Buck, they get skittish, they get stage fright. Do you know what I mean? And they start putting out those disclaimers and saying, well, I had a phone call with so and so, and everything looks better than it looked before. So I agree with you that the idea that any of those people are going to save the SBC is a little bit far-fetched. But Berean Babes, I'm sorry to take so long to get to your point, Berean Babes. She has this point. It's better than Bart Barber. So Berean Babes says it's better than Bart Barber. There's a lot of alliteration there. Uh,
There's
the
better
one
than Bart Barber, and then there's is that enough?
Yeah, is being better than Bart Barber in my mind is not enough. But at the same time, Bart Barber is so bad, and I can talk about why that would just be so bad. Are you open to the idea that just for this one, if Tom Askell is the only guy who can get elected whose name is not Bart Barber, is it worth it to just pay the money, go to Anaheim, and just make sure that Bart Barber doesn't become the next president?
Man, if I were in an SBC church a few weeks ago, I might have been more revved up for that. Now it's, to me, looking more iffy. So I
Yeah.
would totally punt on the issue and delay. See what type of infrastructure is being built up to get people mobilized to Anaheim. See what type of infrastructure is there. So, and just kind of wait to see if they're actually forming an army here.
Yeah.
I don't want to like Robert the Bruce this, if you get that reference, but yeah.
Well, tell us what the reference. Tell us what you mean by it.
He's kind of the guy that betrayed William Wallace at last minute.
Right.
So, and then he led his own rebellion, which Netflix made a movie about, and I watched that movie, and it's just another bad Chris Pine movie. And
yeah,
there's one good movie, and that is it's that neo-Western one.
yeah. Well, one thing I've learned in my years in the SBC is the illusion of having a champion is often just as bad as having no champion, or of just dealing with sometimes it's worse than dealing with your enemy directly. Thomas says Vody collect bodies Bauckham. Yeah, Vody Bauckham is an interesting person to throw into the mix, but he is not going to run for the SBC president, right? He already said.
So I'm confused about this because Vody Bauckham said he's not eligible to be SBC president because he doesn't consider himself a member of the Southern Baptist Convention based on his view of church membership and how it has to be local, even if he is a sponsored missionary from an American Southern Baptist church. Mm-hmm. Yet, so he had qualms about being Southern Baptist president, yet he does not have qualms about running for president of the pastors conference.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get that.
I get it.
Is there that much of a substantial difference?
No. I can give you my take.
Okay. Yeah.
He doesn't want the job.
Well, is that it?
Yeah. Who doesn't want? I mean, can you imagine if you become president of the SBC and you've been elected by the people who want the SBC to get cleaned up? I mean, talk about the Herculean task. I mean, you're going to have to open up the books and figure out where all the secret money has been stashed by the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, which has overseas accounts, the IMB and the NAMB.
They get $7 million a year. They got to do something with that money other than
right. Well, and then the mission boards.
Blog.
You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars with the mission boards. I mean, all those church planning schemes. Those are. I mean, to try to clean all that up, and you'd have to fire so many people. You would have no friends left after the first 2 weeks if you actually were going to fire. Because what I would do if I were, and I would never run because I don't want to do this, but if I did end up in the presidency, what I would do is I would hire people that were smart to do an inventory of all of the conflicts of interest, people who are on multiple trustee boards, people who have shown really bad judgment, people who have conflicts of interest, people who haven't been transparent. And I would ask for all of the resignations publicly. And if they, the ones who didn't resign, I would move to, I would do what I had to do to try to put pressure to get them out of those positions. You would have no friends left.
I mean, you would have to FDR bully Supreme Court justices to get enough spaces opened up so you can make the appointments to make the necessary, flip the voting in your favor type of thing.
Yeah. I don't think Vodi Bakum wants the job. I think he's sane enough. I mean, he has enough common sense that he knows that job would be horrible, especially if you're being put in that position by people who want to see massive, massive change. Okay, and then Berean Babe says, what if Tom Askell would make JD as his vice president? Okay, so first of all, Ray, would it even be possible that Tom Askell would make JD Hall? I assume she's talking about JD Hall.
Yeah, I assume that's JD Hall.
Would that even be possible, and would that be an answer?
I don't know what power a vice president of the Southern Baptist Convention has.
Yeah.
Like they're the president if he dies, right? And then otherwise they just serve on committees.
Mm-hmm. JD Hall is a good person who strikes me as, he might get really depressed if he's trapped in a position where he can't be himself. And I just think that if JD Hall were stuck in a position in the Southern Baptist Convention, he would get so depressed. He would get gloomy. I mean, his posts would start to be really depressing. I just don't think he'd thrive in that position. It's too political. What do you think?
He's backing out of polemics.
Yeah.
So he did an entire thing on that, which is unfortunate. I certainly wish I had been in the game longer while he was in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be unfortunate, but
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if he's backing out, I don't see him getting into that. Like I don't see him wanting that.
Yeah. Well, here we have one from Atomic Apologetics. This is a longer one. And if you could weigh in on this one, I'd appreciate it. It says, as someone who was friends with KSP on Facebook, whatever that means, it broke my heart that KSP is withholding pertinent information concerning Buck's reputation. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the infamous Karen involved in Karen Gate, Karen Swallow Prior. There are a lot of people that I have come across who have said the same thing, that they feel like they have this friendship with Karen, or they have some kind of special connection to her, that they've seen the bright side of Karen Swallow Prior, and they often say in public discourse it's unfortunate that she's made all these people angry. I went to graduate school with her. I do know her somewhat on a personal level. But my view of it is I've already seen enough from her that I'm not really surprised or disappointed at these things anymore. None of this surprises me. But how do you react to what Atomic Apologetics says, Ray?
I can't say I would feel heartbroken about someone that I was connected to on Facebook, but other than that, I don't know how surprising it really is. To me, she kind of always seems like a political operative.
Mm-hmm.
I don't follow her on social media anywhere because I got banned off of Twitter. But so, so I can't say I really keep tabs on her.
Well, it's part of the adventures of Karen Swallow Prior. She'll make friends with people, and she'll really make a great impression on this one individual. And then when she goes out and she gets herself in hot water, she kind of relies upon those special friendships to buffer her, to insulate her, so she doesn't feel the full backlash. I think that she may be running out of insulation at this point, though, because I think what she did to Jennifer Buck is pretty severe. Like, that's something that I don't believe people should get fired over stuff like that. But given the fact that she has gotten Paige Patterson fired and she got all of the people he hired fired, I wouldn't feel bad if she got fired over what she did with Jennifer Buck, because that does show a real compromise in your Christian witness and in your character,
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
It just kind of seems like the online influencer simp relationship where there's a lot of defending of someone's honor that in white knighting that really doesn't have any merit to it. That's kind of what a lot of the defense of her comes across as. And if you look at a social media following, a lot of it's feminist or Episcopalian types.
Yeah. Well, there's
her
a
and
lot
Beth
of
Moore, a lot of overlap.
Yeah, there's a lot of white knighting that goes on. Okay, so here's Sean Warwick says Vody told a friend of mine he didn't want it because basically just wanted a black face. Yeah, that's probably part of it too. The fact that there was a little bit of racial.
I called out. I called out the Conservative Baptist Network for what like. They had such boomer tactics that I thought they were going to nominate Lee Brand Jr. to be the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. I thought they were going to nominate him because they wanted someone that was establishment or established enough, so he had enough name ID, but was black. And Vody Bakum was out of the picture. And then Tom Askell just superseded that and got nominated.
Right.
So I assume Founders Ministry had more to do with that than Conservative Baptist Network. But I totally thought they were just going to nominate Lee Brand Jr. because they're really hyping him up because they successfully got him elected as first vice president of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah. So there was some of that.
I think that they're very creative in their strategy.
Well, okay. Berean Babe says it's taking care of the dirty work. I think she's referring there to Vody Bakum's.
No, I think it's J.D. Hall being vice president. I thought that.
Taking care of the dirty work. Yeah, it would be interesting. But one person does make a good point here. Thank you very much, Atomic Apologetics. J.D. Hall is focusing more on politics in his home state. That does make sense. I also just think on a personal level that he is prone to that kind of depression or that sadness that when he can't be himself. And I think that if he were going to be muzzled, because there's no way in the SBC to remain effective in power without, you have to temper a lot of the things that you say. That's why I'm not active in the SBC anymore, because I'm not like that. I just play the game. And that's tough. Now, here's a good question that Berean Babes brings up. Okay. And you might know more about this than I would because I was at Southwestern. So I was not at Southeastern where Danny Aiken was. Why is Danny Aiken so powerful? Do you have any take on that?
Well, first, he has deep connections to Al Mohler. So that would be answer number one. Deep connections to Al Mohler. Southeastern, I believe, is one of the larger seminaries. If I had to guess, it would be top 3. So, and if you look at where I live, people either go to Southern or Southeastern, just based off region. And Danny Aiken played his cards right because he backed Ed Litton. I assume that he backed Ed Litton publicly, and privately probably also backed him as well over Al Mohler. So he kind of played closer to Kevin Ezell, who I would say is the most powerful person in the Southern Baptist Convention, is Kevin Ezell. He has the money. He's Vito Corleone, and he's just operating a racketeering scheme.
I think it was Al Mohler for a while, for a very long time. And then I think Al Mohler created all of these satellite power stations, and then they surpassed him in power. That's how I would read it.
Right. I think in 2020 or in 2021, I wrote that it was a biumvirate. So like the Roman triumvirates, except only 2 and not 1 and not 3. So it was a very shared dynamic between not Danny Aiken, between Al Mohler and Kevin Ezell. It was a very shared power dynamic, but it appears that because Kevin Ezell basically grooms the candidates for president, like J.D. Greer, NAM was very involved with his church for years. So Ed Litton was a NAM guy. He was a NAM guy, and he was their candidate over Al Mohler. So, and then if you believe like the Washington Post and Capstan report talking about how they were busing people in to Nashville to help vote for Ed Litton. So when you look at that, he would be the most powerful, and like all biumvirates, Julius Caesar and Pompey Magnus, they clash.
Well, and the seminaries are always going to be the center of power because they determine the shape of the pastorate. And all of the entities end up staffing themselves with people who made their social connections at the seminaries. And I think Southeastern benefited from the fact that Southern and Southwestern were in tension with each other. Both of them had their own vulnerabilities, and Southeastern was had a little bit more of a wider berth to roam around and get funding from other places. And then I think that they managed to they brought in a lot of money by positioning themselves so that they would look like the portal by which outside groups could come in and liberalize the Southern Baptist Convention, which brings me to atomic
They're
apologetics.
also North Carolina, which
Right.
North Carolina, if you look at, is quickly urban sprawling everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know where exactly in North Carolina it's located. Like if it's in the Raleigh, the Durham area, that's one of the fastest growing areas in the country.
Yeah, I think it's Wake Forest. It's around there. It's definitely.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the areas where North Carolina is kind of like one of those states that it's southern, but it also has this big northern influence because of the tech industries, and Duke University is there.
And Marylanders love going to the Carolinas.
Yeah,
to move.
Yeah. Well, and here is another thing that Atomic Apologetics said. Bottom line, the SBC needs to be dismantled. It's become a CRT train wreck. So thank you very much, Atomic. That's a strong opinion. I feel like I want the SBC to just go away. But given the fact that that is what many of us wish for, what do we do? Ray, should we just give up this battle over the presidency? Should we just let Bart Barber win? Because the fastest way to get the SBC to just crash and burn, I can guarantee you, will be to have Bart Barber become the next president. I can spend a little bit of time talking about why that would be such a colossal disaster. But first, I want to hear
Barber is a man of no integrity, at least in his online persona. Yes. He is a simp. The way he defended Ed Litton and his plagiarism, Sermongate.
And
he went vicious. Over the top rope to do so as well.
Yeah, he's vicious. I'm going to tell you some stories at some point when we get through some of these comments. I'll tell you some stories about the way that Bart Barber acted when he was a trustee at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and while I was there. Okay, there is one thing I wanted to go back to. Atomic says that his opinion is that Pryor is the anonymous person who passed the information around and doesn't want to get caught. That could be. I think we're going to have to wait on some of that to see the other information that comes out.
That is the opinion of Protestia.
Yeah,
she was the one who leaked or knew who did leak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because apparently from what we can gather, there were a lot of people who knew about this leaked essay. And it had been shopped around in several places, but the only person who had low enough standards for moral integrity was David Baumgartner, who published it. I mean, who wrote the article. Let's just assume that he wrote it. He may not have written it. Someone else may have written it and just put his name on it and then published it at Baptist Global.
Plagiarism is widespread.
Yes, plagiarism is widespread. We're living in the Ed Litton age. But Karen Swallow, we don't know. We have to wait for, I think, more information to come out. Okay. Now, there was one other thing here. By the way, his servant says that the metropolitan area is Raleigh. Where
I'm seeing Sean say that it's Woke Forest.
It's Woke Forest. Yes. Now, Atomic
Which
says,
I feel like I've heard that a lot, so it's got to be correct.
That it's at Woke Forest. All right. Yeah. Atomic says part of the ongoing battle is the Christian liberals versus the Reformed Baptist, even some Calvinists. It's funny because it's hard for me to really align the battle along those signs, because on both sides you have people who claim to be something and then they just really are creeps who are trying to advance their own interests or get their hands in that tithing money and that mission money and that church planning money. So it's a little bit hard for me to, put it into simple words as to what's going on with the SBC. I do think that the biggest problem is just how they treat people, and the fact that so much of it is just so transparently a business. And it's all about people who are, I believe, very mediocre, who are not really skilled, who wouldn't make it in a normal work environment. They are flocking to this huge fat trough of the SBC. And because they just are not that skilled at things, they have to resort to a lot of cliquish politicking in order to get ahead. That's how I would say it. Do you think that this is basically the Christian liberals versus the Reformed Baptists?
I'm
Right?
going to say no, but for a slightly different reason, because I think the people who call themselves Calvinists are on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
So, Danny Aiken says he's a 4-point Calvinist, which doesn't really make sense because it's a logical system. So I don't know how you reject one of once you accept the Lutheran view of predestination, you should accept all 5 points of Calvinism.
Yeah.
But I digress. I don't know how you don't accept one.
Well,
because
which
that's
one does he
illogical.
reject? Like irresistible grace or something? Or
I think it's limited atonement is what he rejects.
okay, that's one that sometimes people.
I get it, but if you believe in the Lutheran view of predestination, all 5 of those fall in line. But if you reject it, then the points of Arminianism fall in line.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as a soteriological divide, because a
Mhm.
lot of the people who call themselves Calvinist, Al Mohler,
Mhm.
I don't know about Ed Litton. I feel like he doesn't have any consistent principles. Him and JD Greer, since you got the same sermons as he's preaching the same sermons as JD
Right.
Greer,
Mhm.
where one week it would sound very Calvinist, and then the next week it would contradict the teachings of Calvinism. So I don't know where they stand on the issues
Mhm.
either.
Well, that's
So I'm not sure who, other than someone like Al Mohler, who's known for being Reformed, would be the total Calvinist, or maybe Adam Greenway
yeah.
would be like a total Calvinist on the woke side.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's why it's hard for me to really label it theologically or ideologically. I think so many of them that, in my experience, are just people who they don't have strong convictions one way or the other, but they know who they're friends with and they know what they have to do to get ahead, and they're very easily brought into these schemes because often along the way they do things that are dirty or wrong, and they have to cover it up. So they're very vulnerable to pressure being put on them. Stay quiet about this, and then we're going to protect your secrets. So that happens quite a bit in the Southern Baptist Convention. Atomic says, as a Calvinist, I notice who is not a Calvinist within the SBC. Good point. Good point. He does say that we make good points. Dig on America says this: all churches or businesses most are run by men who would not be successful in other businesses. Hence, churches should be taxed after 250K. All right, good point.
Hey, there's a lot of life coaches and motivational speakers who take offense at that comment.
But
they wouldn't be successful anywhere else. Although Craig Rochelle is apparently, I think he was in the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma, despite no experience in that field. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, interesting. Atomic says a 4-point Calvinist is just a semi-Pelagian. All right, that sounds like some inside joke. I have to try to think about what
JD. Yeah,
Calvinist is. I figure out which is the thing that they reject: the perseverance of the saints, or
unlimited or limited atonement. I think
limited atonement. I think that's the big one, is the limited atonement that they do. Okay, JD Greer is a Calvinist. I think he did say he was
at times.
At times, but I mean, some of these people.
It goes back to your point about strong conviction.
Yeah. Their convictions are always, somewhat muddled. Okay, so I'm going to tell a little bit of a story about what happened when I was at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, because I think this bears upon the issue of Bart Barber being the next president of the SBC. He was a trustee at Southwestern. He was probably one of the most vocal and prominent trustees at Southwestern. He was there at the time that Paige Patterson was ousted with the very strong hand of Karen Swallow Prior, because she wrote that petition claiming that he was sexist, or that they had to take action because of his views on women.
And it had to do with like a married and divorce situation, right?
Yeah,
Didn't it have to do with something like that?
And you know, the more that I think about it as the years go by, the more outrageous that ouster of Patterson was, because Dorothy Patterson was his wife, and he always credited her for being the more intelligent one in the couple. He always said that, you know. And she wrote the Bible, for the Baptist Bible for women. I mean, this was a couple that did not deserve all of those ugly epithets. But when I first got there, I got to Southwestern at a time when Bart Barber was very cozy with the Pattersons. You would have never guessed that there was any tension between them. And then he just pulled out the knives at the Dallas convention in 2018, got up on the stage, and he claimed that he had inside information about how he had privately, again, this is the same theme, that he had privately talked to Paige Patterson and he was trying to help him, and that Patterson was, he wasn't cooperative. And then lo and behold, then the trustees leaked parts of this letter, and they didn't leak the whole letter. They only leaked part of it. Remember that had that term, "I'm going to break her down." Do you remember this, Ray? They leaked part of the letter against Paige Patterson to just make the public outcry so strong. They violated all of these rules that the trustees were supposed to follow when they fired. I mean, they violated the rules. They got rid of him, and supposedly it was to deal with the women's issue. But once Paige Patterson was gone, it had nothing to do with women's issues. It had nothing to do with Christianity. They just fired everybody that they could get rid of who had come in under Patterson. And it wasn't even because they had gripes against some of these people. The real reason why they fired all these people was to make room for the people that they wanted to hire, who were coming from Southern. It was an invasion. It was basically a colonialist expropriation of another institution's resources, if that makes sense. And it was brutal. The way that they did it was vicious. I remember it was after they announced that Adam Greenway was going to be the next president. In April of 2019, all of the faculty were herded. We were all herded into this room. It was this conference room. And we were told that the rumors were true, that a large number of people were going to be fired, okay? The night before, they had this trustee dinner where Bart Barber was there and all the other trustees were there. And I came with my wife, and all of us were there, all the faculty with our spouses. And at every table, there were 2 or 3 trustees, and they were making small talk, but it was so obvious that they were trying to see which of us they could fire. So they were asking all these personal, very pointed questions. And then they would ask students. They would try to get the students to give them an idea of who they should fire, you know, and they claimed it was because of a budget crisis, which was complete BS, because they soon replaced all of those people and then hired more. They had all these people that they wanted to hire. But so after that, after having that humiliating dinner with us, the next day they bring us in and we have to sit through 45 minutes of all of these irrelevant announcements. And then Adam Greenway gets up there and he says, okay, well, yes, it's true. We're going to have to lay off about a third of the faculty. He wouldn't tell us who was getting fired then. He said, go home and check your messages. And if you receive an email from the provost's office asking for a scheduled meeting, then you'll know that you're fired. So all of the faculty, for hours afterwards, everyone was desperately texting each other to try to figure out who got fired and who didn't. It was so sadistic, Ray. And then they had them scheduled.
That's messed up. Like, if I got that email, I'll delete it, and then George Costanza act like I didn't quit.
Well,
walk into work the next day.
It was so sick. And then they had them going in at 15-minute intervals. They would go in to talk to the provost. And by the way, Adam Greenway brought in this horrible provost named Stinson, Randy Stinson, who then had to resign a year and a half later.
He was the one who lied about you, right?
Yes, he lied about me. He was a drug addict. Okay, so they had him come in as the hatchet man, and they must have known he had a drug problem if that was the case. They must have known this when they brought him in from Southern. So they had all of the people who were getting fired, they had them in 15-minute intervals outside of Randy Stinson's office. There was nowhere for them to sit because there were so many of them. So they're standing in the hallway while one person's getting fired and then coming out. They made them all sign non-disclosure agreements. So in order for them to get a couple extra months of health insurance, they were not allowed to talk about the circumstances of their firing with anybody, right? With anyone. I submitted a resolution that year against non-disclosure agreements, and then I was, chastised and threatened by the provost because we weren't supposed to talk about the non-disclosure agreements because everyone had signed them because that's how they fired them. All right. They managed to get a lot of the faculty who didn't get fired to go along with them for a little while. And then they fired even more people later on. This is the kind of crap that you're going to be dealing with if Bart Barber becomes the next president. He was a trustee. He was right in the middle of all of this. This is very much the way that he and his circle roll. They will have access to so much financial data, to so many, they'll be able to pull these kinds of games and they'll keep everybody quiet with all these games. That's why this blew up with Willie Rice and with Tom Buck and with Karen Swallow Prior. They were trying to shut Tom Buck up because he had exposed what their Willie Rice had done. And they were exposing something that they could not permit to be exposed, which was the fact that their allies were just as implicated in sex abuse cover-ups as anybody else. Do you know what I'm saying?
So
that's what you're dealing
we
with.
should kind of walk through the timeline of this, just because not everyone might know of the circumstances of the context of why we're talking about Karen Gate and Tom Buck.
Yeah.
And then Willie Rice and his connection. So the story, as I understand it, is Willie Rice is the one, not Willie Rice. Tom Buck is the one who went to Willie Rice and said, "You got a problem here."
Right.
That you should address, and went to him privately about it.
Mm-hmm. And then Willie Rice, apparently, he realized that he was getting himself in trouble, right? But I think from what I understand, he denied some of or I don't want to get too out over my skis because a lot of this I haven't seen the confirming documentation. But Willie Rice did withdraw from the race for the presidency.
Right after he did a video in which apparently he wasn't entirely honest about the timeline on the said deacons in Deacon Gate. He was not honest about the Deacon Gate, about the person from Deacon Gate and his profession of faith and timeline of when that happened, which is the major discrepancy in what Willie Rice said during his 5-minute video.
Right. So that was one of the reasons why he got himself in trouble, but he did step down as the candidate running, and he was replaced by Bart Barber. So now it's Bart Barber versus Tom Askell. But Tom Buck, who's friends with Tom Askell and who had been integral in trying to confront Willie Rice, had to be put in his place. He had to be threatened with some kind of retaliation because this is how these people roll. This is what I'm telling you. This is how they operate. They do everything in the shadiest and sleaziest ways possible. It has nothing to do with Jesus Christ whatsoever. And so that is how this whole mess came out, is that Tom Buck had confronted Willie Rice, and because of that, they needed to pull any dirt they had. So they went and they found this thing that his wife had written 4 years ago, and then somebody leaked that. All we know for certain is that Karen Swallow Prior was one of very few people, if not the only person, who had seen that draft 4 years ago. And then it got leaked and got into the hands of David Baumgartner, this 24-year-old young writer for Baptist Global News. So it's pretty ugly, the whole thing. Now there's a lot of comments coming in. A lot of this is the debates about Calvinism, which I'll defer those to Ray if he wants to address any of those. I don't want to know whether I'm a Calvinist or an Arminian. We'll see if in the comments they can guess whether I'm a Calvinist or not. I don't know. We'll see. But here are some of these. No one talks about the discrepancies in the interpretation of the book of Revelation. To me, that's important because it's a godly mindset on how to live in these times. That's very true. I think that we should, the book of Revelation needs massive study.
Not totally Revelation, but it was Ezekiel, and I'll be doing a video on David Jeremiah's erroneous interpretation of Ezekiel 38 and 39. So
okay.
Shout out, because I'm writing about David Jeremiah and his I'm doing research on him currently. Yeah. So the thing that stuck out to me the most was his erroneous dispensationalist interpretation of Ezekiel 38, which is just horrendous.
Yeah. Well, here's one that says Karen Gate is perfect. I think we should try to make that a thing. Like Karen Gate. Let's try to get that phrase out there. Hopefully that would just be perfect, because it brings up the whole Karen thing, and her name is Karen, so it's perfect. All right, let's see here now. Berean Babes, question is why they got rid of Willie Rice so they can have control with Bart. Now, what do you think, Ray? This is a good question. Why? I mean, assuming that someone had a conversation with Willie Rice and said you have to step down. You're becoming too much of a distraction. Why do you think they did that, and why did they swap out Willie for Bart?
I mean, I predicted that they would, when Willie Rice stepped down, I literally predicted that Bart Barber would be the nominee. I think it was an obvious prediction, but I guess the question is, why was that an obvious prediction? And I
To
don't
me,
really
that's not
know.
an obvious.
Name
I mean,
ID
I
is
don't know.
one
I mean,
reason.
I have to give you massive props. I would have never guessed Bart Barber because to me, it's like, I mean, he is so universally known as someone who is sleazy, who has no ethical principles, who will be friends with you 1 minute and stab you in the back the next. I mean, the idea that anyone would think that they could sell him to the Southern Baptist Convention, that to me shows that they have a completely low opinion of the people who are in the SBC. But apparently you
I think he's more of a company man. I think that's how he's seen as. He's seen as a someone who wants to aspire to be in Southern Baptist politics.
Mhm.
And who else do they have? Who else would they have in the running? Danny
Yeah.
Aiken's more powerful as the president of Southeastern.
Yeah. Well, they could have
Uh,
just found some young, I don't know, some young, handsome pastor who no one knows yet, who doesn't have a lot, you know what I mean, that they could control more easily. I mean, Bart
I
Barber
think
has so many,
Kevin Ezel was expecting 2 years out of Ed Litton.
and they
So
didn't have anyone. Yeah.
yeah, they didn't have their backup ready.
Yeah. And I guess they probably needed someone that they knew was really firmly in their camp, not someone that
Willie
might,
Rice would have been choice one, and
yeah.
then you know Bart Barber is your company guy. He will fall on a sword for you guys. So
Well,
that's what he's doing.
as long as it's benefiting, him, or as long as it's like it's got some ego feeding for him. He'll also stab you in the back if it's not in his interests. You know what I mean? Okay, here's one. What are your thoughts on Tom Buck? Atomic asks this.
That's a good question. Again, I don't know the guy, and I don't dislike the guy either. He's very active on Twitter in a good way. He's done a lot of exposing of specifically some of the churches that the North American Mission Board has planted that are
Mhm.
not in line with the Southern Baptist Convention. So he's done
Yeah.
a lot of good work there. I don't think he's the writer that he used to be.
Hmm. I think
Uh,
he's someone
so
who's
he's more of like a social media pundit at this point than the writer that he used to be, in my opinion, or my observation, I should say.
yeah. I
But
think that
he's done a lot of good work on exposing NAM.
he has a big heart, and he's done a lot of really great stuff. Like he exposed. Remember when he exposed Sam Albury's is that how you pronounce his name, Sam Albury? Remember how his group was telling young sexually confused Christian boys to go to gay nude beaches? Remember that? And Tom exposed that.
No, I
So,
don't remember that.
oh yeah, that was that was 2019.
What?
Yeah, he's done a lot of good stuff. My only thing on Tom Buck is I hope that he gets a little bit tougher when there are wolves. Like call them out, just deal with it and deal with it publicly, so that the people who have been victimized by these wolves don't feel like they're abandoned by people. Okay. So that's good. I'm going to skip over some of the stuff about taxes that's in the comments. Um,
Korean
uh,
Babe saying you took too long to answer whether you're a Calvinist, so therefore you're not.
wait, hold on. Okay, Sean
Sorry, I had
Warwick says about the John Harris thing. Don't worry. Okay, so here we go. Atomic says, "Don't worry. I'm just joking about it. If you're not a Calvinist, no big whoop. All right, good. Atomic, we're on this. We're on the
well,
same page." And
I would
then
agree with that because soteriology is you know that 1+1 = 2, but this is where you get into how 1+1 = 2. So you're trying to
right,
explain that you have the correct answer, but your math you're trying to explain, except it's a more complicated problem than 1+1 = 2.
right.
It's a more complicated problem, and I think in my opinion, I don't think the Arminian math adds up as well. In my
Mhm.
opinion. It adds up very well from a human perspective, but I don't think it adds up well from a God perspective. If
Mhm.
we should try to guess or
Mhm.
think about what God's perspective on salvation would be. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Okay, well
But
that's
it's not a
good.
salvation issue. It's a
Right.
math of salvation issue.
Okay, it's kind of like the quadratic equation. If you can end up at the same quadratic equation, you
Right.
got
You
the
can
right equation, but the whole proof that led you there might be different.
right.
Yeah. Well, here's
Uh,
one from Berean Babes. She said Tom was threatened that if he released the Zoom video, then the draft would be made public. All right. So I just want to find out, is this stuff that has been confirmed? Are there receipts
Tom
on this?
Buck, I believe, put out a statement on his church website.
Okay, so this is the what he has backed up with his own account, right? That he was threatened
His elders made the statement.
that if he released the Zoom video, then that is just so nasty. Thank you so much, Berean Babe. By the way, that is just so inconceivably nasty. That's just so
Okay,
nasty.
letter from his church. I'll see if I can pull it up.
Okay.
Uh,
Professor Lopez is not a Calvinist. You took too long to respond, which doesn't happen. All right, Berean. I think you may be on to me, but I'm still going to try to pretend to keep it secret for a little while. All right, Sean Warwick. See Ken Gentry's resources on the subject of eschatology, and then Montana Viking says I have a beard, so I'm not a Calvinist. Is that true? Like you have to have a beard to be a Calvinist?
it is a thing. It is a stereotype. And
Yeah,
maybe
it is.
you sip craft beer and smoke cigars as well.
Yeah.
Uh,
All right. Well, okay. Atomic says I couldn't. I don't think I could handle having a president named Willie. But can you handle having a president named Bart? I mean, I'm just gonna think it's gonna be Bart Simpson jokes, right?
I'm actually currently watching The Simpsons all the way through from the
Yeah.
beginning. I'm like a few episodes in, so the Brat Bart
Really.
comes to
Um,
mind. I'm having trouble finding the statement on their website. Let me see the
the
search.
beard is a requirement. I mean, I think while you're looking for
I
that,
found it.
okay, you found it. Okay, so what is the? Can you read the statement for us?
I can share screen
Okay.
if that would be. Let me
Does that
pull it
work?
up on a different tab.
Yeah.
So, window. Here we go.
Oh, there you
You're
go.
able
Okay.
to
Yeah.
Okay, so on April 7th, our pastor's wife, Jennifer Buck, published an article at G3 Ministries that told the story of God's redemptive grace in her marriage to our senior pastor, Tom Buck. On April 11th, Baptist News Global published a piece which attempted to redirect attention away from this theme of redemption, instead seeking to discredit Tom and his ministry. Baptist News Global's publication misconstrued details which were taken out of context from Jennifer's private 2018 rough draft of the article, as they were quoted in a screenshot of an anonymous tweet. Due to some political machinations within the Southern Baptist Convention, that which have been working to behind the scenes to tarnish our pastor's name and discredit his ministry, we, as the elders and other leadership of First Baptist Church, Lindale, Texas, feel it necessary to provide the following details surrounding these events. So that's how it begins. And you just want to go through it's long.
Oh wow. But they have his back, which is good. I like to see Christians like coming to someone's defense, you know?
Yeah, the elders.
Yeah.
So so it's interesting. So she published this article, Restorative Grace.
Okay.
And apparently she'd been working on material related to this. Maybe this article is just a prelude to that, whether it's related to an actual book or whatever. She's been working on something about this for years, evidently.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a rough draft that was apparently a little rough. That was taken out of context as the long and short summary of this, but it goes into a lot of details. Specifically, shortly after Jennifer sent her rough draft, Karen had a tragic accident that hindered her from giving Jennifer the help she needed. With the busyness of life and no one to help her edit, the project had been placed on the back burner for Jennifer and Tom. So 4 years is a long time for a back burner. So we had an anonymous Twitter account that claims that he was an abuser. Tom received a phone call on March 31st asking him if he was trying to destroy Willie Rice, who had accepted a nomination for SBC president on April 1st, just hours after Willie Rice made a public announcement about removing a deacon in his church after he was contacted by a pastor in another state. Tom received a phone call asking him if Jennifer had written a blog post about him having abused her.
Mm-hmm.
He was told that Jennifer had been sent, or what Jennifer had written had been sent to several news outlets. It became apparent that Jennifer's 2018 rough draft had been leaked. What follows is a brief account as to the apparent reason for these phone calls. And just to interject here, who in these circles would have ties and connections to several news outlets? Karen Swallow Pryor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can't. I want to make sure we get a statement that she was the only one who had that draft, but it doesn't look good.
It's clear that she might not have been, but she does have the media connections.
Yeah. Well, and certainly, she's done so much up until this point that she has managed to escape the consequences for. That it's not like I want to protect her good name. I mean, what she did to Paige Patterson was disgusting. And the fact that she showed no remorse over all of the people who were tied to Paige Patterson, who were working on things like racism and sex abuse, and who got fired by Adam Greenway, who was her, the person that got into power with, and she did nothing to help the people who suffered. That she lost me at that point. I will never defend her. I do want to get some confirmation as to whether she actually leaked this. There was a statement that I saw, a quote that she has been attributed to her, that she said, Jennifer, these are your words. My mother told me that never put anything in writing unless you want the whole world to read it, right? That was the statement that really drove the Bucks to say, like, she should be fired for having said that. But that's on that statement, right? Is that in the letter?
Oh, which part?
The part where Karen apparently told Jennifer that those were your words, and my mother told me never to put anything in writing unless I wanted the whole world to read it.
Yes, that is in the statement right here.
Yeah. Can you read that paragraph just so we can get...
Okay, Tom and Jennifer contacted Karen, who said that she had refused to verify the rough draft and that she didn't think it was right to publish. Jennifer pleaded with Karen to tell them who came to her, citing how wicked it was to twist a wife's words to weaponize them against her husband. Karen refused to give the name of the one who came to her. In the end, she laid the blame at Jennifer's feet by saying, "They were your words, Jennifer, and my mom said that you should never put in writing what you don't want the whole world to read."
So Karen is claiming that she didn't leak it and she didn't want them published, right? Which, I mean, I wish I just had more reason to trust her.
So I think
that. Mm-hmm.
Just trying to reread that again. Didn't think it was right to publish. Jennifer, who came to her, citing Karen refused to give the name of the one who came to her.
Which is just weird. I mean, it's like, just tell us.
So, just to use a biblical standard here,
mm-hmm.
The one who covers up the crime, just to go back to the Old Testament law, God kind of views as guilty as though they committed the crime as well.
Yeah.
So if we want to use Old Testament law standards, which I think in the grand scheme of God and how he judges people during the day of judgment, I think it's fitting that it's kind of moot at this point whether she was the one who leaked it or not. She's covering up the person who did.
Yeah. Well,
It is a conspiracy because she was, according to the statement, which cites her directly, she was in communication with the person who leaked it.
Right. Yeah. And it's not right the way that she handled it, regardless, because this is dealing with a woman it's part of the issue of sex abuse. It's dealing with a woman's marriage. It's dealing with a woman's situation. And for her to deal so callously with it when she has made a name for herself about how she's going to go and uncover every rock in order to defend women's rights, I think that's hypocritical, to say the least. But this is fitting with Karen Swallow Pryor's pattern, which is, when Jerry Falwell Jr. had his fall from grace from Liberty University, Karen Swallow Pryor had worked for 20 years under the Falwells at Liberty, and she came forward. She raced to CNN to say, well, Karen had raced to CNN to say, I knew of all these things that were going on at Liberty that were terrible. She never said anything about it while she was there. Do you know what I mean? So, like, either she is not being honest, she didn't know those things, or she's being honest now, but she was dishonest then because she kept all that stuff secret, even as she was going around saying that she was this crusader for truth, justice, and the American way. And she was going to take down Paige Patterson, and she was going to expose his secrets, but she wasn't going to expose the secrets of the man who was her boss. So I think the pattern of it is she does not have principles. She's a cruel, callous, sadistic person.
And the person that seems to be covering up for Karen Swallow Pryor would be Danny Aiken.
Yeah.
Per this statement, Danny Aiken is the one who's covering up. He said that, Karen will give you the information within 48 hours, and it never came.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer decided that the sinful actions of a few people and the ensuing turmoil must not ellipse her past desire to share a completed, beautiful story of God's redemptive grace in her marriage with Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Let's see. So
Berean Babes
that's
says
why
Karen,
she published the article on April 7th.
Yeah. Berean Babes said Karen was the only one who had the draft. That's interesting. So I have heard that from a couple different people. I think we just want to make sure that we can get some kind of confirmation from the Bucks, because Karen Buck would know if she sent that draft to more than one person.
Jennifer Buck, you mean? But
yeah, Jennifer. I'm sorry. Yeah, Jennifer Buck. I think any way that you do it, this is Karen Gate. Karen has to own it because
it's a conspiracy that she's a part of.
Yeah,
which is why Karen Gate is very accurate.
Yeah. Especially because she was this person who, made this big deal about how she was going to fight for women and defend women. I think for me, what is so sad at the heart of all this is the fact that I was an ethnic minority. I was a sex abuse survivor. I was someone who was working hard on all these issues, and I found myself driven out of the convention. And none of these people in Karen's group ever expressed any remorse over the fact that they lied about me, and that that they just completely didn't really defend any of these causes that they claim that they were defending. It's so disgusting. TJ Johnstone says, instead of assuming Karen was being dishonest, she may have been fearful of the blowback of whistleblowing. I don't know. I don't know if I really, I was someone who spoke out when I was at a seminary and I lost my job. That happens. You do that. If these things really matter to you a lot, you kind of have to stand up and you have to take the blowback. It was very, very hard to lose my job, but that is what you do when you really care about those issues. Berean Babe says that's what the Bucks have said. That's interesting.
I mean, again, the question is, did Karen leak it or did she have an underling leak it?
Right.
So that, but she's in a conspiracy to leak it, and Danny Aiken's evidently in the conspiracy as well, according to their statement.
Right.
But another point of interest is on the screenshot, if you want to put the shared screen back on the thing, there's an email from Willie Rice to Tom Buck, which I think is interesting.
saying,
Thank you for your call this morning for the update. This is on Saturday, March
mm-hmm,
26th. I am sorry the conversation with Redacted did not go well. I have been deliberating a great deal on the topics you raised, and you made many good points that we are wrestling with. I acknowledge that you are correct about several things you said and the inconsistency that exists in our current stance. We are working as a leadership team to address those very things. I would be glad to follow up in a day or so to let you know of the actions we are taking. We must be open to correction. I pray we will be so inclined and take your thoughts, insights to heart, and make make corrections as necessary. You're right about the hard conversations, but you did a stand-up thing, and I guess they highlighted that
mm-hmm,
by coming to us directly about this or to address this. I respect that. I do hope to protect Redacted from any further embarrassment or pain, but I also assure you that we have no desire to cover anything. If we have made a mistake, we'll own it and try to correct it. Thank you again for the conversation. I guess the Redacted there was the wife's name of the deacon, if I
mm-hmm,
had to take a guess. You have a tough reputation among the people I know and connect with, so quite honestly, I didn't know what to expect. However, I found you direct but respectful, and I appreciate that. Regardless of my what the future may hold, I pray we can have an amenable relationship based upon mutual respect and love for our Lord and his church. Thank you. So that's Willie Rice to Tom Buck.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
What does that
Well,
make you? Does that change your opinions of Willie Rice?
I don't I didn't have any opinions of Willie Rice to start out with. I mean, he always kind of paled beside all these other colorful characters that were surrounding
I
him.
kind of thought he was very thuggish.
Really, he just looked to me
Yeah.
like a real company man, like just someone who's
The sermon that he gave the sermon at the last year's convention, the one that's like, being a jerk is a real thing. Like that was his famous line from that.
yeah
Critical race theory is a real thing, but you know what else is a real thing? Being a jerk, which just I don't know what type of people thought that was an amazing line. It wasn't.
yeah yeah
To me, it was just very effeminate. But uh, that was Willie Rice, so that's why he was a prime candidate
yeah yeah
because they had him give that pastor's sermon.
mm-hmm.
So they had him in the bullpen, and then he just didn't have a clean house.
Yeah
Evidently, when it came to the scandaled deacon from
mm-hmm.
even though it was 2005. Uh, yeah, if he made a profession of faith prior to that, then he would be reproached. Just the
Yeah
way I see it, he wouldn't meet the requirement of above reproach, in my opinion.
mm-hmm. Well, at
So
any rate, I really want to thank you for this discussion. It was a lot of fun, and I want to thank TJ and Berean Babe and Dig on America and Tom Nasser, Greg Olson, and Sean Warwick. We had a bunch of people who joined. I really want to thank y'all, and let's all just Atomic Apologetics. Let's see, who else did I miss? And we know 828. So thank you all for joining. I hope I didn't miss anybody.
his
And
servant.
let's all just keep our eyes on the prize, see what happens next. Montana Viking asks, how likely is a conservative resurgence if Tom Askell is elected? That sounds like a great topic for the next podcast, or maybe you can do a whole evangelical dark web on that.
I gotta redig into this current issue to write on that, but
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone, and we will see each other again very soon.